Welcome back for part 2 of our examination of Tartary, Tartaria, and the Tartarians. In looking at the people groups identified as Tartarians and barbarians, we find that there are similarities and overlap. And so it looks like either these identities are conflated or perhaps these are the same people. There's definitely suggestion that these are the same people. And one of the dynamics you see with this large collective is a process of naming related to behavior. So you see these behavioral appellations. And so you see the Tartarians are associated with Tartarus. And Tartarus means what Tartarus means. But what's happening is you have this collective of people being given this name of Tartary, of Tartaru, of Tartarian, because they were understood in terms of the people that experienced them as hordes of hellions. And so, as you will see, they were considered to be these devilish children from hell, essentially. And so you're also going to see, and we've talked about this before, that there's a relationship between the barbarians, the Berber, and the collective known as Ishmael. And so that Saracen identity is really related to Hagar. It's unclear why the individuals were referred to as Saracens, unless, of course, you have a collective going on here with perhaps Ishmael and Esau. And so that definitely looks like a possibility given the descriptions of the behaviors of the collectives. And so this hordes of hellions is related to this identity that is associated with Tartarus. Now, it's really unclear why there is this sort of pretending that Tartary is a figment of the imagination or something that's made up and contrived, because you have these collectives of people that have been identified with this geographic name and this social group. And so you also have some analyses of the people that are understood as the Tartarians. And as with a number of societies, you have collectives of people that have different phenotypes. And so in some instances, you have the white Tatars or Tartars, and you have the black Tatars or Tartars. And there's an examination of some of the perceptions of the Tartars in this particular article, and we're going to look at this. And here you can see there's reference to different types of Tartars. So you have the raw ones, the white ones, and the black ones. You have the raw ones being referred to as those who were impoverished and crude, able only to ride on horseback and follow along with the rest. However, you had another collective known as the white and the black Tartars, and they were given a more favorable description according to this narrative. It's also important to keep in mind that sometimes when you see black and white, it's not necessarily referring to phenotype. It often is, but it's not always referring to phenotype. And sometimes the word white is an indicator of nobility status versus actual phenotype or racial status. And so you see here an indication that the black Tatars or Tartars are not accorded the same character description of the white, but you have various black Tartars holding positions of leadership, and this includes the Mongol ruler known as, in this instance it says, Genghis Khan. However, if you recall, the C and the K and the G sounds, they are interchangeable, and so this can also be Genghis Khan. And you also have this descriptor of this particular individual as being large or gigantic. And this is in contrast to the depiction that is often presented with respect to those who are understood as Tartarian. One thing that stands out about the description of the Mongols is that they are considered a classic northern people. And there is reference to the northern tribes and conquest by northerners in scripture. And so in this instance, you have a group of people that are associated with Ishmael being identified as the conquerors of the southern collectives. Now, there are some questions about this particular text by McRitchie, but we're going to refer to it again here. And this is that Ancient and Modern Britons text. Again, there are some questions about this particular text and its authenticity. However, we are going to examine it again, and this is from 1884. And as you recall, in the text, there was an indication that the Moors were also known as the Saracens and often identified with the Gypsies. And you also see that there is an association again with the Tartarians, who were considered the terrors of Europe. And so they were identified as what was known as the Golden Hordes. You might have been hearing people talk about the coming Golden Hordes in more recent times. But in the past, the Tartarians were identified as the Golden Hordes and the terror of Europe during the 13th century. And so you see all of these sort of chain link connections between these people groups. One thing that's indicated here is that Tartarian also was synonymous with the construct of a thief. And so you have Tartarian associated with being a hellion, and then you have Tartarian associated with lawbreaking and being a thief. And here you see very specifically that the Tartarians are associated with Hagar's descendants. And remember that Hagar was the mother of one of Abraham's children, Ishmael. And so the Ishmaelites are the individuals who are understood as being related to or identified as the Tartarians. And if you recall Hagar's identity, this particular passage makes sense. And so the Tatars or the Tartars were described as a troop of fully 100 lean, black, hideous Egyptians. And so they are identified as Egyptians. And you have a number of people groups, even on the west coast of Africa, who identify as ancient Egyptians. And then you also have some individuals in the Americas identifying as ancient Egyptians, and identifying in some instances some of the people groups identified as indigenous Americans as also Egyptians. Of course, you also have the Scots identifying as coming out of Egypt with Queen Scotia. This is why it's so important for there to be clarity about these various identities, because you have people who are sort of, casting a wide net and identifying everyone as one thing or another thing. So you'll have individuals identify everyone under the umbrella of Jacob, everyone under the umbrella of Indigenous America, everyone under the umbrella of African, everyone under the umbrella of Western European, everyone under the umbrella of Moor. What's happening, however, is that these identities are being conflated. It appears that you have collectives of diverse groups of people, but people groups not allowing other people to be distinct. This is a boundary issue. So you got a collective of people who are in many ways identifying as being associated with Abraham with boundary issues. And the boundary issues involve not recognizing that all of these people may in fact be distinct groups of people. They appear to be distinct groups of people. But you have a number of individuals who are pretty insistent that whoever they are, whoever they believe they are, so is everyone else. And so it complicates matters, because you're really talking about, when you start talking about these people groups, Esau, Ishmael, Jacob, Lot, you just throw them all in there together. And even when you're talking about Jacob and the various groups under Jacob, these people are enemies. They are not friends with each other. And so this idea that they all need to sing Kumbaya and come together is ludicrous. But moving right along here. So you also see that the Tatars, or the Tartars, are associated with the Thracians. And so therefore they are seen as a warlike people. Their faces generally are described as Mongol-like faces. They have flat Tartar faces, is how they are often described. And you can see this sort of flat face in a number of people groups around the world. It's a very common facial structure. Now, what you also have coming out of Western Europe is a facial structure with a prominent brow ridge. And so you see these very diverse phenotypes. These are not the same phenotypes, but it doesn't mean that they are not in the same families, because all it takes is a generation or two to change phenotype completely. But here you see that the individuals are identified as black as pitch. And so this might also play into that naming of Tartary, because if you think about pitch, you think about tar, you think about black, in terms of a color. And so this is how the individuals are described as complexion dark. And we can get into this whole dynamic of these words such as dark and black and concealed and hell and a fair, because these are words that tend to be given to or imposed on certain groups of people. And so there's a lot that comes along with that, because dark is synonymous with concealed, and concealed, of course, is synonymous with the word hell. And so you have people groups going around being referred to that which is synonymous with hell, whether you're talking about those who are holding on to the name associated with a fair or Afrique or Africa, or individuals who are identified as black. You have the same dynamic going on. Or Barbados, you have the same situation going on. And so here you see that there is this description of those individuals who are understood as Tartars, and it is a description that involves features that are stereotypically associated with those who would be coming out of the continent of Africa, certain parts of Africa. Again, of course, those individuals that are on the west coast of Africa actually came from the north, and they came from the east, and so sort of descended on the west coast of Africa. And so even though that might be the phenotype of those individuals, that's not a complete phenotype for all of the different people throughout the continent of Africa. One thing that's indicated here is that the Tartars pretty much descended into Russia, and they are identified as ravaging Poland, ravaging Russia. They are definitely identified as a black Tartar race. And to the individuals who were identified as Christians, they were seen as, again, hellions. It's noted that they were also dressed in caftans. And here you can see that, according to this narrative, the Tartars were perceived by the Christians as the children of hell. And this is in quotation marks, quoted that they were devils. And so you can see that there was definitely a sense of animosity with respect to this particular people group. They were described as having swarthy skin, and again identified as being similar to gypsies. They were also again identified as warlike. Warlike is a description that goes along with both Ishmael and Esau and a couple of those sons of Jacob. There's also an indication here that the Ishmaelites were also found in Austria in the 11th century. What's noteworthy here, if we're talking about the Ishmaelites being the Tartars, is that there has been an adoption of the identity of Saracen, or this is an appellation that has been given to this collective of people, and that in and of itself creates confusion. So if you're talking about the Saracens, you wouldn't typically be talking about the Ishmaelites. You would be talking about those who would be descendants of Sarah. So you have Esau, you have Jacob, you have Isaac. As we wrap this up, we can see that there are a number of issues surrounding this Tartarian identity. One thing that is clear, however, is that you have collectives of people that are being identified as one thing, and in many instances, it's likely that they are something else. And so you have collectives of people that are variously identified as Ishmael, Esau, Jacob, again. But the individuals might not all fall under those umbrellas. And it's probably helpful to have people have a better understanding of who they are in terms of ancestry, because again, these people groups are not friends, and so you may see some dynamics being played out in current times based upon this long standing discord that's just below the surface. But with respect to the issue of Tartary, Tartaria, and all of that, um, it would be helpful to get a better understanding of what's going on with that and why it's being shrouded in so much mystery. Now, of course, coming from the word Tartarus, that's pretty loaded, and so it would also be helpful to have a better understanding of why this geographic space was given that name. Was it an appellation related to the people? And so, since the people were seen as hellions, the place was identified as hell? Or is there something else going on with that? Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.